No, sorry, these are.
I feel a little crowded.
And you work with everybody looking over your shoulder?
Joe, can you sneak in because my phone is pointing directly at the top of Deb's head? Oops, I got bumped. Am I blocking your...
I am not more than one. I was every job I had, I was self-employed. Wherever I was. Even while you're in the house, make sure
Good morning, Michael. There we go.
Oh. Hi, how are you? Good, how are you?
There, still pointing.
It did.
No, I'm live streaming.
Yeah.
So
No.
I'll be out of the way in 1 second. I just want to make sure this all works. Okay, and that one up there is recording. Yep, I'm out of here and free to go. Now you just need someone to bring you coffee and you're all good to go.
Your host is assistant director. Oh, no, I told you an assistant. So we could hear other people on the committee. Oh, you're plugged into the panel. Yeah. Oh, okay, that's fine.
Well, I contacted John.
Well, I guess I'm supposed to put it right here in case I have an issue. It's right next to me.
Probably better.
That he got me
The legend.
Yeah.
We love it.
He's really good friends with my dad, too.
Oh, there you go.
And I contacted him, got me in contact with Airbnb. And then,
So the day we get out here, it's really just
Make sure that's not going to be in his way.
No, he's going to be standing on the other side of the camera, so I put it right under the tripod where he can't stand. You good with that there? Oh, yeah. That's fine. That's fine.
she was terrible. She never did get a nervous energy. I just figure out a way to take care of my entire life. You got it.
yeah, there's nothing like that.
No, there isn't.
Oh, we do have a road trip. It's a little bit more, but that comes second hand when you live there. It's a nice area.
And I didn't remember, so I tried. And if you lost it, just go in. And go to Shoemaker. But anyway, I told her, I said I was going to leave early. And I don't think she wanted to leave there early.
Very good. You think something was going on today?
Yeah.
This is nuts.
You don't have the report.
Yeah. That's
There was one report here.
very hard. So
What are you trying to say?
I'm sorry.
Hey, how are you? Oh yeah, I have a feeling it's going to happen.
I'm sorry.
Good morning. Welcome to the Government Oversight. Before we get started, a couple of announcements. First of all, there is an overflow for folks who don't have to stand. It's right across the way. It's the Education Committee room. You'll be able to hear what's going on and be able to come back in if you'd like to. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that for those of you, we're talking a bit about the process in a minute, but for those of you who would like to speak a little later, there is a sign-up sheet over on that large table. And generally speaking, in certain sections, we're going to take people in the order in which they have signed up. So if you're interested in speaking later, please go ahead and sign up on the sign-up sheet. So good morning again, and welcome to the meeting of the Government Oversight Committee. And we're going to start with the committee introductions, starting on my far right with Representative Sanderson.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Deb Sanderson. I represent District 88, which is Chelsea, Whitefield, Jefferson, and part of Noblesboro.
Good morning, I'm Amber Stracchio. I represent House District 18, which is part of the city of St. Paul.
And good morning, I'm Chuck Kruger, the House Chair, representing District 92, St. George, Thomaston, South Thomaston, Cushing, Matinicus, and Freehaven. And welcome all.
Bob Duchesne, House District 121, which is Elton, Argyle, Hudson, Corinth, and Milford.
Good morning. My name is Paul Davis, and I represent Senate District 4, which is parts of Somerset, Penobscot, and all of Piscataquis, which currently is in the out of glory. I encourage you to come up and see some beauty.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Diamond, Senator from District 26. My Senate district includes Wyndham, Raymond, Casco, Standish, Baldwin, and Tri-Island.
And good morning, I'm Mike McClellan. I live in Raymond, Maine. Bill and I are neighbors. And I'm the House rep for House Seat 66, which is parts of Raymond, Casco, and Poland.
Good morning, I'm Stan Josofsky, State Senator, District 24, which we all know is beautiful downtown and scenic Brunswick, the rolling hills of Panel, the working waterfront community of Hartsville, and the Shopee Natural Resource next to Creekville, and recently added North Yarmouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator?
Senator Chris Johnson, visiting lovely part of the mid-coast. I think we're in peak color right now, and fog, and the still water is beautiful. It's Lincoln County, all the towns except Dresden, and adding the towns of Windsor and Washington.
Thank you. My name is Roger Cates. I represent Augusta and some surrounding communities here in Senate District 15. And welcome to all of you who dodged through the traffic, the rush hour traffic to get here today. Glad you're here. So we're going to, Chairman Kruger and I have talked about this. We're just going to set out how we're going to proceed today so everybody knows what we're up to and how we plan to conduct the day. So back on July 1st, this committee charged OPEGA, the oversight, the Office of Program Evaluation and Governmental Accountability, to determine the facts associated with alleged proposed changes to the state's fiscal year 2016 and 2017 Department of Education funding for will-hinckley and the impact of those proposed changes to the school. And that's the scope of the review we asked OPEGA to conduct, and that's exactly what they did. And they prepared a report, which is called an information brief, and that report was presented to us by Executive Director Ashcroft back on September 8th. At that time, we had an opportunity to ask staff, specifically questions, and we then set this matter for public hearing. Our purpose for being here today, just as we do in every single review that we conduct. As we often do, we asked several people to appear before us this morning to answer committee questions. We asked 4 people, 4 invitations, to people who played some significant role in the events which led us here today. The first request was to Cynthia Montgomery, the governor's attorney. She has declined to appear, citing as a reason the pending lawsuit brought by Speaker Reeves against the governor. She has, however, supplied some written information, which Beth will tell us about in a minute. The second invitation we issued was to Aaron Chadbourne, a senior policy advisor to the governor. Mr. Chadbourne has also declined to appear, citing the same reasons as Ms. Montgomery. We also invited Thomas Jordan, the acting commissioner of the Department of Education. Mr. Jordan expressed a willingness to appear, but he is legitimately unable to do so because of a medical issue. He did express a willingness to answer questions in writing, which we did not get at any time, but he has submitted a letter to the committee, which is now in our file. The fourth individual we asked to appear is Jack Moore, the chairman of the board of will-hinckley. I understand Mr. Moore agreed to be here and is with us this morning. So here's how we plan to conduct the hearing going forward this morning. First, we're going to ask Beth to provide us with some additional information which has come in since our September 8th meeting. Then we will invite Mr. Moore to join us to make any statement he wishes and also to answer questions which members of the committee might have. And after that, we're going to open up the hearing to public comment. First, we're going to ask for if there's anybody here who has had actually direct involvement in any of the issues which led us here, and then generally members of the public. We want to hear from anyone with respect to information they may have that they believe is relevant to our inquiry, and any comments they might have or suggestions they might have for the committee on anything else we should do or any further actions you think we should take. At the end of the public hearing, we'll go into a work session to determine what, if any, further steps the committee may wish to take based upon everything we have learned today. I'd like to make 3 points before we begin. Number 1, this public hearing is following exactly the same process we followed in every single review, and we're following it here. Second, I want to reiterate the goal that all 12 of us on this committee have, which is just to get all the facts out. We are a fact-finding committee at this point. That's what we've been doing, and that's what we do today. And third, I'd like to remind everyone that the scope of this review is fairly limited, as I said out before. But I think it's helpful to remind everyone that this hearing is not about other matters that might or might not involve the governor. Accordingly, we will ask anyone who wishes to speak to try to confine your remarks to the scope of this particular review. Having said that, this is a public hearing. We're here to do the work of the public, and we want to hear from you, and welcome each and every person who took the time to get here. So first, we're going to ask Beth to bring us up to date on some other information which may have come forward since our September meeting.
Good morning, Beth Ashcroft, Director of the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. Committee members had several questions at the September 8th meeting that I have put together responses to the degree that I was able. That document is behind tab 2 in your meeting materials, and I will just run down through those questions and responses with you to start with so that you have that information. The first question had to do with understanding how big a part of Goodwill-Hinckley the Means Charter School actually was. And so we sent off a question to Goodwill-Hinckley, asking them to explain that to us in terms of what percentage of the budget for both revenues and expenses the Means School represented for Goodwill-Hinckley, what percentage of the students, et cetera, were served, were attending Means School. So Goodwill-Hinckley did provide information on that, which is on page 1 of that document. Goodwill-Hinckley's budget for the current year is about $5.2 million. The Means part of that budget is about $1.6 million, or 31% of the total, and that's the expenditure budget. Means is budgeted to bring in about $1.4 million in revenue, and that leaves a shortfall between its budgeted revenues and expenses of about $233,000 that Goodwill-Hinckley covers and has been covering to about that same level since Means was established. Goodwill-Hinckley currently has 156 students on campus, with 124 of them, or 79%, being students of the Means School. And we also asked for what percentage of the staff at Goodwill-Hinckley were working at the Means School. That number was a little bit more difficult for Goodwill-Hinckley to give us a specific percentage on, because there are shared staff between Goodwill-Hinckley and the Means School. But a quick estimate they gave us was that 40 to 50% of the total Goodwill-Hinckley staff is allocated to Means. Another question the committee had was whether the $530,000 in funding for Goodwill-Hinckley was part of the governor's line item veto of the budget that occurred. Based on our discussions with the Office of Fiscal and Program Review, it's our understanding that the $530,000 for Goodwill-Hinckley would not have been affected by the governor's line item vetoes. The governor did line item veto all the proposed increase in the general purpose aid for local schools program, which included both his own proposed increases as well as the additional $19.5 million the legislature had added to that program. And while the Goodwill-Hinckley funding, which is the Center of Excellence funding, is captured under the GPA program, no increases had been proposed for that funding line. The $530,000 was the same as it had been in previous years, and so technically that was not vetoed. The committee also asked if we could obtain for them a copy of the June 18th letter from the Harold Alfond Foundation to Goodwill-Hinckley Board Chair Jack Moore. We did speak with the Harold Alfond Foundation, and they were willing to allow us to share that letter with you, and it is attached to your response document there. We were also asked again about providing the handwritten note from the governor to the Goodwill-Hinckley Board Chair. I will remind the committee, OPEGA did request categories of documents from Goodwill-Hinckley that would have included the handwritten note. We also specifically asked the board chair to provide the handwritten note. He told us he no longer has the note. We also requested categories of documents from the governor's office that would have included any copy of the handwritten note that the governor may have kept. The governor's office declined to provide any documents to us beyond what they had already released in response to a FOIA request, citing the pending lawsuit against the governor. A copy of the handwritten note was not among the documents the governor's office provided. We did follow up. I did follow up with questions to Cindy Montgomery specifically, asking, because they had offered to answer questions in writing. So I did jump the gun a little bit and did ask whether she could confirm whether there was a handwritten note that the governor sent and whether or not the governor had a copy of that. Her responses are that the governor has indicated that he did send a personal note to Chair Moore, but the governor's office does not have any copies of the personal note sent to Mr. Moore. We were also asked whether the June 28th video from WMTW, which we had mentioned in our brief, had the governor admitting to threatening the funding for Goodwill-Hinckley, whether that was available for the committee. I did send the committee the link to that video online. In addition to that, though, OPEGA also has an audio clip of the actual interview of reporters, Peter Merrill and Mal Leary, with the governor. That is a little bit beyond what the video provides, and we did provide you a written transcript of that audio clip in your file so you could see what the actual questions and responses were. Lastly, you had, not lastly, but you also had questions about details about the feedback and the pulling of donations that Goodwill Hinckley had experienced. Chair Moore has been advised that that's a question that the committee has, and I hope is going to be able to respond to that for you. And lastly, you had asked for a copy of the Ethics Commission letter to Speaker Eves. A copy of that letter is also attached to this document. In addition to those questions, you had tasked OPEGA with conducting an interview with Mr. Brown, since we did not reach out and interview him during our process, primarily because we felt it was more valid to learn from the others at Goodwill Hinckley what role he had played than to necessarily hear it directly from him. And we did feel that we got a very good sense of that, both from other board members that we spoke with, as well as Goodwill Hinckley management and staff. We also could see what Mr. Brown's involvement was by virtue of reviewing the recruitment and selection documentation that Goodwill Hinckley gave us access to. Nonetheless, we did interview Mr. Brown. His description of his role in the recruitment and selection process is consistent with what we learned from other people. He did review and prioritize all of the 19 applications that were received to determine who should be interviewed. He did not make any comment on whether Speaker Eves should be interviewed or not. He did participate in all the telephone interviews with 5 of the candidates. He did not participate in the telephone interview with Speaker Eves. He also recused himself at any point when a decision was to be made or an interview was to be conducted involving anyone he knew that was an applicant. He was present at the board meetings with both candidates, but his role was only to open and preside over the meeting. He characterized the Means board as guests, and the Goodwill Hinckley board did the voting. He did participate in the May 13th informal meeting that Chairman Moore arranged in Brunswick with the top 2 candidates. The Means board felt it was important to have a representative of their board at that meeting, since it was a departure from the process that had been laid out. No one else from the Means board was available, so he went. He said the discussion with each candidate was different, but generally the purpose of those meetings was to discuss questions they felt that had not been completely addressed in the interviews up to that point. And for Speaker Eves, his recollection that the primary questions were in regard to his future ambitions, political ambitions. We did talk with him also about whether he had a role. We had learned that he had a role in making Speaker Eves aware of this employment opportunity to start with, and he did say that the former president of Goodwill Hinckley had approached him and asked him specifically to relay to Speaker Eves that this opening was available and that he might have interest in it. He did not play any role in determining whether the Speaker's contract should be terminated. That again was a vote of the Goodwill Hinckley board. And I think that is the crux of the information that we gleaned from this interview that I thought would be relevant to your question. Oh, we did ask him whether there were any points in the process where he spoke with other board members about Speaker Eves as a candidate. He does not recall having any conversations of that nature with board members. So that is the summary of that.
Does anyone have any questions for that based upon what we just heard? Seeing none.
So then to address the folks that you asked to come speak with you today, there is a letter from Ms. Montgomery in your materials today. It's the final document behind tab 2. As you mentioned, Senator Case, both she and Aaron Chadbourne declined to come today, citing the lawsuit. They did, however, offer to attempt to respond to the committee's written questions the committee had. She does indicate that in doing so, they will be seeking legal advice in their responses, but nonetheless, the offer is there. So that's in your packets. Commissioner Desjardins did also submit some written comments for you, anticipating what some of your questions might be. His letter addressed to you, Senator Cates, is behind the yellow sheet under tab 2. He is essentially providing what he feels is important background for the committee around his decision to withhold the payment for Goodwill Hinckley, that first quarter payment. He cites the fact that the state budget had not yet been enacted, that there was no written agreement in place governing the use of the funds for Goodwill Hinckley at that time, that Goodwill Hinckley stated it had no immediate need for the funds, that DOE still was in a position where it was going to have to cut $1.5 million from the cost category that included the Center for Excellence. So those are points that he's making in this letter. He also anticipated something that wasn't in the letter that he called me about later. He also anticipated that you might have a question about why the 2 payments for the other schools went forward, the ones that were on the same payment schedule as Goodwill Hinckley, when Goodwill Hinckley's did not. His explanation is that he was unaware at the time that the Goodwill Hinckley payment was held, that the checks for these other 2 schools were also in progress. The director of school finance for DOE didn't happen to mention those particular payments. He also wanted to make the point that those 2 schools are somewhat different than Goodwill Hinckley in that they are state-run, state-owned schools, and that there is a statutory requirement in place to fund those schools. There's no statutory requirement to provide funding for Goodwill Hinckley. So that's his explanation as to why those checks weren't handled.
Questions? Please, Senator Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a clarification back to the handwritten note when you inquired from the governor's office. Did they say they just didn't have it?
The exact response was the governor's office does not have any copies of the personal note to Mr. McVeigh.
I get a question about acting Commissioner Desjardins' letter. October 13th, which we now have, in which he sets out the reasons why this funding was held up, justification for that. And I know in reviewing the report that there was some discussion about staff interviews with Commissioner Desjardins in which he had talked about this very same issue. It seems as though the letter seems to add additional reasons which were not disclosed earlier. Is that a fair statement? Can you kind of summarize that for us?
Sure. From my perspective, many of these points in here were not something that we understood was part of the commissioner's thinking process at the time he made the decision. In our first interview with the commissioner, he indicated that he was talking with the lead team about the fact that this issue was arising between the governor and the speaker. He says he didn't mention anything about Goodwill Hinckley funding, but the director of finance offered the fact that the payment was in process and should she hold it. He indicated to us in that interview that it was after that decision, as he was later thinking about the decision that he made, that he started to feel like that was really the best decision to have made because the budget was not enacted yet and they still had $1.5 million that they had to find, and et cetera. So he did indicate in our interviews that the budget situation was part of this, although it seemed to us quite clearly that that came as sort of an afterthought about why his decision made sense. But to point number 2 about there being no written agreement in place governing the use of the funds, we observed in the work that we did that it did not appear that this was discovered, that there was no written contract, or the written contract had expired until after the payment was held and DOE started researching, hey, what's been going on with will-hinckley these years, or at least maybe between June 5th and June 9th. But it's not like they knew right away that they had a contract issue. He says will-hinckley stated that it had no immediate need for the funds. He quotes the Ethics Commission letter. That was on June 11th. That was 2 days after he made the decision. So while it is context around whether it was a sound decision to withhold the payment, it's not something that was part of his decision-making at the time. I'd also point out that in section 4, where he said DOE still needed to make 1.5 million in cuts from the source of the will-hinckley funds, he does have a statement there that says the legislature had, made cuts to those CAS categories, but at no time did it communicate to DOE where this reduction should come from. I just want to point out that as we mentioned in the information brief, we do have emails between he and one of the governor's senior policy advisors occurring in late June that reference the fact that that money is supposed to have come from the technology line item for their 30-year-old computer system. So I'm not sure exactly where the commissioner got that information, but it seems like something must have been conveyed to him that was the legislature's initial intent anyway, somewhere along the line.
I'm asking another question. I don't know the answer to it, but is there any hint that on the Appropriations Committee there was ever any discussion about cutting discretionary funding in goodwill?
No, there was never any discussion that we were aware of, either at the Appropriations Committee or in the discussions that the legislative leadership ended up having around the budget.
Other questions for Ben at this stage? Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so all of this leaves me really wondering what was going through people's heads. There was correspondence, you're saying, that indicated to the Department of Education, indicating that what should be cut was in the technology area.
There was no correspondence. We have emails between the commissioner and the governor's office where they're talking about what changes the legislature has made to the budget. And he's talking about the $1.5 million in cuts that were associated with the 30-year-old computer system.
So they're referring to that cut as being associated with technology, right, in correspondence between DOE and the governor's office.
Yes.
And there was no correspondence indicating that will-hinckley was part of it, nor was there any discussion of that on appropriations?
Correct.
So for me, this claim doesn't pass a straight face
test. Questions?
That was an observation based on the answer.
Any other questions for seeing none?
All right, Mr. Moore is in the room outside with his room, so when you're ready for him, let me know. I'll go ask him.
Okay, anything other preliminary? Mr. Moore in? Just for those of you who might have gotten here later, after we started, there's an overflow room across the hall in the education committee room, probably a little cooler than it is in here. And also, for those of you who would like to speak today, there's a sign-up sheet right over here in the far corner, where we're going to generally take people according to order that they sign up, subject to a few exceptions. So having said that, if there's nothing further, we will invite Mr. Moore to join us. While we do have a break, I'm reminded of something from our terrific interpreters over here. That when we do get to the public hearing phase of the day, as they said, if you could take a breath while you were speaking, because they can only go so fast. How's that?
The chairs are not available for Lamaze training if anybody was.
Morning. Good morning.
I am. Yes, hi, good morning, Dan Nuzzi, Council President. Good morning.
There we go. There we go. Mr. Moore, thank you very much for doing this job. I'm going to guess that you took this job. I didn't think you could do it. I'll just say the committee.
I think this job's turned out to be a little more than I thought, but it's a great institution and it's on a great path. So that's all I know.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here this morning. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to say anything you'd like to, starting off, and then some of the committee members may have questions. That'd be great.
I do have very brief comments, and again, thank you very much for the cast and the committee. I joined the board of Goodwill-Hinckley about 5 years ago, and I joined it because Goodwill-Hinckley changes lives. Every teacher, the entire staff, and the board is committed to Goodwill-Hinckley because we do change lives. And every action we take from every employee and every volunteer alike is all about the kids that we serve. We feel that Goodwill-Hinckley is a crucial part of our state, and the resources that we offer are truly unique and much needed. Our board is committed to the staff and to the students who have so much to offer to society that we need a little bit different path to success. The board has consistently acted as fiduciaries and tirelessly worked to keep Goodwill-Hinckley on the path for long-term sustainability. Our job is to serve the staff and the students and the people of Maine who all benefit from this great institution. I want to talk just very briefly that we do change lives. In Hinckley, we see it every day. We see it at every graduation, that the students that graduate from Goodwill-Hinckley would normally not benefit from their incumbent schools to get through school and to make it. For example, we have a student from northern Maine who had a very complex history that included abuse and neglect. His adopted parents ultimately got divorced. He had numerous educational challenges and persistent difficulties in school. He came to Goodwill-Hinckley and is thriving on our hands-on approach to teaching. He graduated and is taking classes at KBCC and remains on a great path. We have a young lady from Central Maine who did well out of school but didn't really fit in. She was striving for a different environment, something smaller with a hands-on teaching approach. She's at Hinckley now. She has a paid internship. She's a leader on campus and enrolled in classes at KBCC. She's a senior and she'll be looking for a 4-year college education. And lastly, there's a young man from Central Maine who had some learning disabilities, was not thriving in school, and has come to Hinckley and is really thriving in our hands-on, works in the woods and building things, and it's really turned things around for him. So Goodwill-Hinckley definitely changes lives. That's why the staff, the teachers, and the board are all very enthusiastic about our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Are there questions for Mr. Ward? Representative Sanderson.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Moore, and thank you. The school does a great job with many of our youth here. One of the questions that I have, in the report that was done and presented to us in the last committee meeting when we reviewed it, there was a real unique and extensive set of criteria that you were looking for in the role of whoever you hired as president of the school. By the time we get to the end of the report, that criteria had changed significantly. Can you tell me why?
Well, we had a pretty thorough hiring process that was a nationwide search. We got a number of applicants, and as the process carried on, we would narrow the applicants, and truthfully, this is a position that's unique. It's outward facing. The school has a very strong leadership and staff that do very well day to day. So this was a unique job that we needed to look at the applicants that we had and how they could best support the existing staff that we had. So there was some ability for us to be a little tactical on seeing the applicants that we have and who would best complement the existing staff. It's an outward-facing position. It's somebody that we needed. There were definitely some areas that became more apparent for what we needed. Robert Moody, who is the interim president right now, has done a fabulous job, and we really wanted to work around his skill sets to make sure that we utilize him to the fullest of his abilities and serve the school by finding somebody that would really complement him and his senior leadership. So it did evolve a little bit, but our view was that in looking at the applicants, it became kind of a process of looking at the applicants and looking at what we have and what would best complement the staff.
So you had numerous applicants.
We did.
Okay. And of these applicants, were there not individuals who both fit that outward-facing role as well as fit many of the criteria for which you originally advertised the job for, with an extensive education background, experience in that field?
I will say there were no applicants that fit it to a T. So it became clear as we went through the applications that we needed to really prioritize what was important for us and kind of look at the strengths of each applicant and weigh how that would most benefit Goodwill. So there was nobody that we could say, check, 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 check. This is the guy, or this is the woman. It became clear as we went through the process that we needed to reflect on the qualifications of the applicants and arrive at who we felt would best complement the staff that we have.
A whole question.
I don't think any of us is second guessing your unanimous board decision on who we felt was appropriately decision. I counted, I think, 17 different interactions you had sort of with somebody from state government with respect to this hiring decision. I'm not going to go through each one of them one by one, but let me lay out what looks like happened here and ask you to react. Sure. That the board unanimously decided to hire Speaker Reeves as its next president. That the governor learned of that decision. The governor reacted negatively and through himself and through other representatives from his office essentially said, if you hire Speaker Reeves, that your funding from the state is very much in jeopardy. That triggered the Alphon Foundation to question its own continuing commitment if there were no longer going to be state funding. And in light of that, your board made the decision in its fiduciary capacity that it would have to withdraw its offer to speak and look elsewhere. Is that a fair summary of what happened here, sir?
From a very high level, I would say that some of the parts maybe weren't as explicit, but we did react to our interactions with the state government and also other parties where other portions of our funding became requested.
The Alphon Foundation was a
Yeah.
So, is there anything that said, Lord, you quarrel with?
We did look to elect, we did vote for Marquis. Part of the funding did come into question from the state, so you're correct there. I would say from a high level, that's correct.
Thank you. Representative Stockill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You kind of asked what I was going to ask, but I guess, were you the person, Mr. Moore, that received the handwritten communication from the governor's office, and you don't have that anymore? Can you tell us in your own words exactly what that said? And when we get, I've gotten a personal note from the governor, and I saved it, and I can remember what it said. So I would really appreciate, because usually they're pretty short and concise.
Well, there's never been a question if I didn't remember what it said. The note said that I believe he recognized a note that I had written to him that I was working hard to minimize the effect on Hinckley by both sides. And I wrote a letter trying to, I would say very positive, trying to send things in a direction of a very diplomatic, perhaps, dialogue. His response was a handwritten note. It did suggest that he would have trouble supporting Hinckley. I would say the letter that he wrote had no information that the formal letter that was written a few days later had, that in light of hiring Marquis.
Yes, Representative.
In your own words, I would like to know specifically what that said, what he said, because he does have a very concise way of saying it, and I imagine he didn't say it in quite so many words. So I would really appreciate, for the record, you telling us what he said.
The one element the one element that he did say is that he would have trouble supporting Goodwill Hinckley if we were to hire. And I believe there was 2 words, and one of them was scribbled out, but he did refer to him as a hat. It was a short letter, as you said.
Senator Diamond and then Senator Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to drill down just a little bit on the question that Senator Cates. After reading the report, my memory is that, in fact, the board did have an indication of the governor's displeasure with hiring the speaker before the May 15th unanimous vote. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. So the board did know the governor was upset, as the report suggested.
Yeah.
And that was on May 15th when the vote was taken. Once the pressure increased, however, regarding the governor's opposition, after the May 15th unanimous vote,
the vote to hire?
Did you then, in a meeting with the Commissioner of Education, offer the Commissioner the job a week later, on May 22nd, as reported?
No. I had a meeting, so to back up a little bit, the board had voted that Marquis was the guy to be selected. He was not hired until things were negotiated with respect to and a contract was signed. And I firmly believe that that's the case, that Marquis was the guy that we would like to hire, and he was not hired until we finalized that part of the process.
I understand that, Misha. The vote was taken on May 15th to hire him.
Right.
And I just wanted to clarify, did in fact then you offer the job to the
No.
Commissioner?
So I had a meeting with the Commissioner. I believe it was a lunch meeting that was organized well before this. And it did come up because, I did have concerns that this could be something that could impact Hinckley. I mean, everything that we've done is about serving Hinckley's best interest as a fiduciary. And I was curious. The commissioner seemed like somebody I could be a little candid with, to ask, how he felt about Marquis. Certainly, I didn't get the feeling that it was positive. So I was curious onto, what direction did they think that we should have gone. He certainly had answers for that. They were very direct. And I don't recall, but I wouldn't be surprised if his levels of enthusiasm and his levels of lack of approval left me with the notion, is this something you're interested in? That would probably be the only context that I would ask that. I don't recall asking it, so I can say it certainly wasn't a meaningful part of the conversation. It wasn't an agenda, it wasn't an offer.
And then the other part of the report that was stuck with me a bit was your statement that the hiring was not a political hiring, that was not a consideration. And I want to just have you clarify that, since the previous hire was a former Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
Would it not be natural for people to think, well, there's another opportunity to hire a former Speaker of the House and all the benefits that might go with that?
Yeah, well, I'll start with saying our board is well represented by both sides of the aisle. This was not an opportunity for us to partner with either party. We maintained political independence. Glenn Cummings happened to be the previous person. It might be what encouraged him to apply. I don't know, and that could be part of the equation. This is an outward-facing job. This is somebody that needs to be our spokesperson. The speaker is a good speaker, and that was a skill set that attracted to us. It entailed raising money. Our view was that he could probably raise money. So it was not one where we gave consideration to wanting to have a politician representative on Hinckley. It was, politicians tend to have the skill sets of being good public speakers, and that's a key part of this. We have a great staff that can manage the on-campus going-ons of Hinckley. We need somebody who's outward-facing, and as I'm sure you know, he's got a good skill set for outward-reflecting communication.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming, Mr. Moore. We really appreciate your willingness to come down. I'm trying to get to a better understanding of how your relationship with, I assume most of your relationship with the governor during this time was through interim Commissioner Desjardins, am I correct? Most communications came that way?
Yeah, there would be an occasional aide that I would converse with.
Senator Diamond mentioned the May 22nd lunch in Hallowell. After you read this report, was there any consistency with your perception of that lunch versus what you read in the report in which the commissioner felt he was being offered the job that had already been?
Yeah.
I mean, that just jumped out at me, and I'm trying not so much the details of that lunch. I'm more interested in your general sense of what you were getting from this gentleman, because we hope to speak to him when he's in better health. And so I'm just curious about that. I mean,
that did jump out at me, and again, I would say that when you're treading on eggshells and trying to appease everybody involved, one thing's for sure is Hinckley does not seek the limelight here. and we've tried to minimize any anxiety from any parties. So that's our skill set, and that's what we've been aiming to do. So this has been a long exercise in diplomacy. And when you're talking to somebody that's articulating perhaps a challenging perspective, you know, taking a big step in the direction of diplomacy entails asking, so who would you like? What were your thoughts on this? And while I certainly don't recall saying, would you like the job? And it was not a job offer, it was not a means to go down that road. But it wouldn't surprise me if I said, is this something that you're interested in? And it would be along the lines of diplomacy, not looking to refill the job.
Mr. Moore, I wanted to ask a question about the Alphon Foundation, if I could. Because you learned that your state funding was very much in jeopardy if you hired speaker leads. But the next shoe that dropped was, now you've heard from the Alphon Foundation, and if the state funding wasn't going to be there, then maybe the Alphon Fund wouldn't be either. In fact, that money was much more than the state appropriation was. My question is, do you know how the Alphon Foundation learned that this was going on? It seems as though there were communications to you from the Alphon Foundation before this matter became public. How did they learn about it?
You know, I talk to them on a regular basis. They're a very important constituent and a big supporter. I will say that we didn't need the letter from the Alphons to know that we were in trouble with the funding there. The Alphons grant came with very well-articulated stipulations about maintaining financial integrity. And an assessment was done prior to getting the first installment of the Alphons grant. And we passed, but it wasn't by a landslide. So the board knew that a change to this degree would likely jeopardize our ability to maintain the metrics that the Alphons were requiring. So in respect of that, you know, we did try to keep a dialogue with them, and so I think that they were aware of developments probably throughout. I must have talked to Greg at least once, maybe twice, prior to that.
So whether they learned it from you or from perhaps someone in the governor's office or some other place, you don't really know, is that what you're saying?
Well, it could be from me. I'm sure some of it they learned from me. I mean, that was, I think my role is to embrace you know, key stakeholders and make sure that, you know, that I can minimize the surprises. And again, it's an effort in diplomacy that we don't want to lose people along the way. And I will say, I think our board did a really good job of managing throughout this whole process, because you know, it has been a challenge, but will-hinckley's on a great trajectory, and we're on our way to bringing enrollment to 200 students, and that will really take a big dent out of the dropout rate in Maine and have a really positive effect. So we're very proud, and that's really what motivates the staff and the teachers and the board alike.
No questions? Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you as well for coming here and answering difficult questions, trying time for people. I do have another question, however, regarding the handwritten note. And you said you no longer have that. Can you tell me what the disposition of that is? What has happened to that note?
Well, the note, I'm a person of piles, and I did have the note in a drawer for a while. This whole thing has grown old. The novelty of the note certainly wasn't something that that made me want to keep it as a memento. The note did end up in a pile that was heading for the dumpster. And I thought there was a chance at some point that maybe it was in recycling or something. So, you know, I left that door open for a little bit, but in fact, I did go through my piles. And, it seems to be history.
Mr. Moore, you represented here by one of the best lawyers in Maine, Mr. Desi. Don't you want to object to a question along the way?
I'm ready and waiting if the need arises.
Representative Strachio, and then Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I'm just trying to figure out at what point you realized that the governor or the governors was going to influence this process, though, and that at what point you realized that there was an issue, because was it when you had lunch with the commissioner, the acting commissioner of education? Was it when somebody contacted you? I mean, it didn't just come all of a sudden, because you were going through this process. It was a process that the report says was fair, thorough. You know, the candidate rose to the top. It was, you know. So I guess I'm just trying to ask, at what point? Was it when you got the note? Was it when somebody called you? When did you realize that the influence was going to be, there was going to be some punishment, call it what you want, punishment for, if you hire the speaker, this is what's going to happen to you. So at what point did that dawn on you? I mean, I just, that I'm really having a problem. Having that clarity isn't there. It's hard in the report because we get kind of differing stuff. So there must have been like a moment where the light bulb went on and went, whoa, we're in deep trouble here. What am I going to do? And when was that and how was that communicated to you?
Thank you. I will say that I thought the OPEGA staff did a pretty thorough job of putting the report together. There were a few revelations for me. I was not on top of every aspect of all the moving parts, but all in all, I thought it was a pretty well-written report. You know, when did we know? You know, throughout the interview process, we did implement another round of interviews in the process to really dive into, is this going to be a problem? So we explored this from you know, early on to try to make sure that we're not we're hiring somebody that could be effective on both sides of the aisle and be most effective with the will-hinckley. The meeting with the commissioner, I would phrase as a yellow flag, certainly not a red flag. I would say probably the red flag came from our interim president, Rich Abramson, who I believe did get a call or get a direct communication from the governor. But I think my recollection, and I'm not, you know, this summer has been a blur because there's been a lot going on for will-hinckley. It certainly has been for a long time. But it became less opaque, I would say, as the governor's formal letter came out that he didn't approve of Mark Hughes. I wouldn't say that the board construed it as a punishment. We looked at it as he's taking action because he doesn't approve of the hire. So certainly at the formal letter, things became pretty evident that we needed to act. And it wasn't the funding alone that resulted in us the funding this $530,000 from the governor. It was the fact that that put in jeopardize another source of significant funding. And absent that, that could put us in default of a loan. And it basically triggered, and I don't know how much people, much less Mark Eves, knew that this series of events could be triggered. And throughout this process, we were focused on fulfilling our fiduciary duties. And we would not have been doing that if we were to go down the road of leading to a series of defaults that would put the existence of Hinckley in question.
Just two follow-up questions. First, so you truly believe, though, that the one, so you talked about that, the effect of one on the other. You believe, then, that that is, in fact, what would have happened, is that the money withheld by the governor then would lead to money that would then be held off on, and then, in fact, you would lose the...
Yeah, it was definitely a series of events, and that would transpire. The board did feel that we didn't have to act immediately because July 1st was kind of the date that we had to act by. So I think that we did a good job of remaining objective, of not operating on a schedule that would prevent us from consistently acting in the school's best interest.
And did you show the note to anybody else?
Maybe my wife, but I'm not sure. Nobody, it didn't leave the house, I can say that.
I'm not saying the dog ate.
Yeah.
Representative McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I've actually been at the school a few times over the last 5 years. I'm on the education committee. So I was in the room when we first started talking about money, and I don't think we can say enough what a good job you guys do. If any people walk out, they realize that a good thing happens at that school. I have 2 questions. One is back to the reports we had. Do you know who gave the Alphon letter, the foundation letter that you received to the press? Was that something the board did, or the speaker's office, or do you have any idea how the press got hold of that letter?
I do not know. I wouldn't. I know that we didn't. I didn't.
Okay. All right. Second question. If you're a baseball fan like myself, there's been a lot of screw plays, a lot of conjecture plays this week, where everybody looks at it and there's like 7 different explanations, and that's kind of what we're doing here. I think is this weird thing has happened, and I try to think about it as did something bad happen, or is this just politics? Is this just the way the game is played? I mean, I watch people go into leadership offices and kind of crying, so I think this happens a lot. So my question to you, if you're willing to answer it, is in your view, is this whole thing really the political process and just the way it goes and we just have to play the game, or do you really feel like there was a threat to your school?
Well, absent the funding, it would have been threatening for the school. I've really avoided, and hopefully this committee and all appreciates that myself and the board have avoided taking political sides. We're truly apolitical, and if there's one thing that you can see is that the board is well represented on both sides, and we have gone out of our way to keep our heads down and to not fan the flames for this process. So I respect the question, and I guess we're 0-2. I apologize.
No, and I asked last meeting. I asked actually Beth if this all happened just the course of the political process, Republican, Democrat foolishness, budget stuff. At the end of the day, you guys, no one said boo, but you guys got no money. Would we be sitting here having this meeting? And after a long pause, the answer was no, we wouldn't be here. And that's just part of the process. So that's kind of where my question was coming from. Is this just the way we fly?
Right.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regard to the state funding, I'm reading very carefully through the Alphon letter here and trying to tie it back to the report, and then also with the ethics report that came out, which was requested by Speaker Eads regarding whether there would be a conflict of interest in voting, et cetera, and trying to put the whole pieces together. In this report, in October of 2012, there was discussion of not including funding for Goodwill-Hinckley in the 14-15 budget. And this report says that Goodwill-Hinckley established a 2-year plan to shore up your financial basis and essentially, and to become independent of this state funding, which the governor has been very pleased to support that school with. There's no question he has been a tremendous stalwart supporter of Goodwill-Hinckley School since it was passed in 2011. I'm wondering, it's kind of a two-part question, or a three-part maybe. What happened to that 24-month plan where you weren't able to become independent of the state funds? And then, in regard to the Goodwill-Hinckley, as I'm reading the letter, it doesn't specifically say that it's going to be pooling funding. It merely says that they want to reevaluate your books to see that the stability is going to be there going forward. You just said it would put the school in jeopardy, yet in the ethics report, there's the indication that should the funding go away, the school would certainly still remain solvent. All different kinds of things coming at you. I know that's a loaded question. Can you kind of maybe shed some light on that? And also, even though you had that 24-month plan, in 2013, you hired a lobbyist to make sure that funding would remain in place. And then again in 2014, hired a lobbyist to make sure that funding would remain in place, and included the funding from the state as part of your grant application to the Alphon Foundation. I know that went everywhere, but
yeah.
Maybe we should take it one question at a time.
Yeah. The plan to work independently of this funding was certainly a focus of Goodwill-Hinckley all along. I think what became clear for our sustainability is that we needed to rebuild this school. We needed to grow enrollment. And we were curtailed on enrollment with the current environment that we had. There were a number of factors. I'll say that, you know, when I joined the board of Hinckley, we had close to a $1 million deficit, and that's in 1 year. The school's made tremendous progress towards financial sustainability, and I think that remarkable success, particularly in the trajectory around 2012, led us to believe that perhaps we could get there. I think that we will definitely bring enrollment up to around 200 students. As we do that, we can allocate our fixed costs over a wider population, and, you know, economics 101, that makes things a lot better for Goodwill-Hinckley. So we were off by a little bit. With respect to, I know that our CFO at the time did indicate that he felt that we could work through this. I think that you'll have to ask him on his reasoning behind that. But what I can say for the board is it was clear to us that we barely, or we passed the scrutiny for the grant, and not with flying colors the first time. And that absent this funding, we felt it was prudent to assume that we would not be able to pass that. So when we got word of an assessment we don't need for them to close the door on the funding formally. It would be imprudent for us to not act, given this heads up that there's an assessment. And again, with the governor's funding, it didn't need to be an explicit order that we would not get our funding for us not to react. I think it would have been imprudent to just wait for the chips to fall. So the board was very proactive. We felt on both fronts there were reasonable threats or concerns to have to take proactive steps at the appropriate time to address our funding.
Thank you. Senator Burns. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative, you done?
I just have one follow-up question. According to the report, there was a lot of discussion about potential concerns that the governor would have should Speaker Eads be hired for this position. There was a lot of discussion, evidently, regarding potential funding loss. Yet you chose to go forward.
Again, we chose to go forward in the beginning because we didn't have to make a decision at that time. And, I think the board did a very good job of remaining objective and taking a step back and recognizing what we need to do now and what we need to do by particular dates. So our inaction immediately, I think, was a very thoughtful approach. And it's the byproduct of the fact that we weighed all of our options and explored all of our possibilities and didn't jump to a conclusion. And I think that while there's always going to be room to second guess any decisions, particularly as time goes on, I think it was a prudent path for the board to take.
Thank you. Senator Burns.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for being with us today. And I appreciate your diplomatic way of answering some of these questions. Some of them are very difficult, I realize that. My resolve today was to do a lot more listening and talking, but this is something that you've hit on 3 times now that really makes me curious, I guess, and it's kind of a follow-up to Representative Sanderson's question. You talked about the board made great effort to find somebody that was out-facing, someone who would represent the school and gain the support in the community. And you also mentioned a couple of times that you have a very well-balanced board as far as both sides of the aisle, very well put to make these decisions. Given all the history that your board certainly must have been aware of, and the angst, I guess, is the best way to put it, maybe between the governor and the speaker, and the years prior to you making this decision, is that a concern for the board that maybe that type of selection might bring about this type of conflict that we're facing right now? Or will that ever become part of the conversation in the screening process?
Well, we certainly didn't envision being here. I'll say that. I know that for sure. We did feel that there was a potential risk, and that's why we injected a 3rd round of interviews to kind of flesh that out. And we did explicitly ask Mark. We had a number of issues. One, he would be commuting, 100 miles a day or 150 miles a day. There were a few things that we needed to flesh out as board members, and we certainly wanted to make sure that we had somebody that would be fully engaged to do the job. We explored and we asked at various times about the relationship with the governor. I will say that I wish I had better color on this. My perception is that we're kind of entering a perfect storm here, and I think at the time that we were going through this process, it was probably the height of the storm between maybe the governor and Mark and his party. And that certainly didn't make things easier. I will say I'm not going to second guess the answers I got. I will say that I feel perhaps things have changed from the starting process to the ultimate decision making day.
Thank you. Representative Shane.
Thank you, Senator. What we're really digging down to, I guess, is this is public money and how it was spent or not spent, and public employees paid for by the public administering this money. So there's a whole public process that happens before money is ever given to anybody. There are qualifications that are set. The recipient has to be deemed to be qualified. So was there a claim from the governor's office or from the governor himself or the acting commissioner that hiring Speaker Eves would trigger a failure to meet the qualifications that you would heretofore met in order to receive this money in the first place? Any claim that you were failing to meet the qualifications for which you got the money?
It was a series of conversations that definitely left a strong impression that we have trouble supporting. Again, we viewed that as financial support. And they did indicate that they felt their reasoning was not political but objective and based on qualifications. That was the extent of the conversations going back and forth.
So the school met certain programming needs the state wanted to address in its own budget. And so you met those qualifications. Hiring Speaker Eves meant that you no longer met those qualifications, according to the governor's office?
I think, and I'm just kind of summarizing a series of conversations that they felt they would be responsible in supporting this.
Thank you. Chairman Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to see if I can flip my friend Senator Burns' question on its ear a little bit and ask for your personal opinion on this. Do you think it's appropriate and proper for a state chief executive to insert himself into the internal affairs of an institution?
Well,
I think that's the proper question. Mr. Moore's here as a volunteer. We're the only ones that have come here today. He's obviously given a lot of time to this. But I
just
think
as personal
opinion. I understand that. So you've been trying to remain above the political code. I think that's kind of thrown away.
I will say that I have been trying very hard to minimize myself in the middle of this. So I appreciate the introduction and the respect that that's public.
Thank you. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask a different question around that perhaps would meet your expectations. Given statute, bylaws, etc., where does the sole authority for making hiring and firing decisions President will-hinckley rest?
With our board, the board of the will-hinckley.
And the decisions that were made, obviously they seek input from other parties. And is it correct to assume, based on, I would think, from the information we had, but I'd like to hear from you, that you did receive some feedback from the governor, among other parties?
We did. I mean, the process was very inclusive. It included the Maine's board to some degree. It included staff and teachers to some degree. At the end of the day, I would say there was probably input more on the second round, maybe recommendations, but on the first round, I think that the disapproval with Mark Deeds was the extent of the input, aside from the lunch with the commissioner.
And so, would it be correct to say that after considering all of the input that they chose to in that process, the board, having the sole authority to make that decision, chose to hire Mark Eves as their next president?
Yep. Any other questions from this committee? Representative Sanderson.
Thank you. I believe you were shared the question, in the last part of the report here, there were some impacts to will-hinckley events transpiring, and some of them refer to loss of donations to the school. I believe these would probably be from individuals, and then some negative correspondence, and I believe it's indicated that you were going to be prepared to maybe share some of that today. Was all the negative correspondence, was that all in opposition to the governor expressing his displeasure?
Yeah, I would say that it was predominantly aimed at lack of approval for us to ignore our fiduciary duties and to stand up to the governor.
And some people have reached out to Goodwill-Hinckley and pulled their donations to school. What donations would those be? I know you probably can't share individual names. Right. I understand that. But if you could share to the extent that you could, that would be great.
We did get letters saying that, from previous donors saying that we're no longer supported. In general, we're trending well under, development is a large part for the institution, and I will say there's a number of factors involved, but we are trending below where we would expect to be.
With sensitivity of individuals who sent you correspondence, negative correspondence, would you be able to provide those with identifying criteria redacted, please? So they're not identified, but just so we could see the tone of the letter of that correspondence, would that be possible for you to provide to us?
Yeah, let me think about it. I mean, I think
fully understanding that you would take any identifying information out of it.
I'll look at that and get back to you.
Thank you. It would be wonderful if you could share that.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Zofsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for coming in today. I have a couple of short questions, but they're kind of direct. I'm wondering, you've been on the board for a while? Involved with the board for a while? Has anything like this happened in the past?
No.
Such as when you hired Speaker Cummings?
Speaker Cummings was hired just previous to my coming on the board.
Has the board ever reached out to the administration in the past for who was acceptable, who wasn't acceptable to be hired?
No, the board and the schools had a dialogue with the governor. That certainly wouldn't be in the past with what we've done.
I know with other boards that we all deal with on a regular basis, such as your board, that often boards will have conversations with different members of the administration about upcoming prospects. And I'm wondering if, and I know that that's been done in the past, and I'm wondering if that was done this time.
Certainly the candidates that we received were, I don't think any, had nothing to do with the governor's office. I will say both for the principal job and particularly for the second hiring, one thing that we wanted to do was to expand the pool of potential applicants. So as I mentioned, the first round of applicants, there was nobody that was check, that had everything. So one thing that we did do is we made it a point, both for the principal job and the executive director job, to look for who would have the ideal credentials and encourage them to apply. And we did do that. And so I don't believe where we stand is the recommendation of everybody in Augusta. But we did kind of beat the bushes to try to get the applicants that we maybe have more things checked and be somebody that might not normally be looking for a job, but be an excellent hire.
Okay, so in your district of the board, in all the time, have you taken, have you made the names of people that you're considering for position part of the administration's
we did not
veto
do that.
or not veto or like or not like
No,
or whatever?
No, both rounds.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Although, you know, that one conversation with the commissioner early on, that was not a conversation to you know, that was a conversation to kind of diplomatically present the notion that Mark Hughes is a selection.
Okay, but that wasn't searching for approval.
I was hoping for approval.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Just remind the committee that we are still on Mr. Moore, and we have an awful lot of folks who come probably from some distance to speak, so hopefully we can finish with you soon, sir. Senator Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that thought in mind, I will prove to you that I can be brief. Mr. Moore, thank you for being here. First question I have, I'm curious, donations to will-hinckley schools of that type, they add public information?
Probably not. I don't think so. Maybe if it was directed to means, it might be, but my understanding is that Colby doesn't disclose every single donation. I could be wrong.
Colby's a private school.
Yeah.
Not funded by taxpayer money.
You're right.
I think that's
My perception is, and I could be wrong, I'll look it up and we'll try to get back to you if there's a couple of
You felt the correspondence between the school and the administration had before coming using that type of funding. You provided good.
Yeah.
If I could take you back to the dinner date or the lunch date that you had with the acting commissioner. My understanding of what you said was that you didn't offer the position to him, but perhaps inadvertently or in passing you might have said, do you want the job or something like that.
I might have asked if he's interested.
Could he possibly have taken that differently?
Apparently.
Well, the investigative report, OPEGA did.
He says he didn't quit his job because it wasn't really an offer.
Well, he says that he was left with the impression.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like the CFO has a different impression about the sustainability absent the 500,000. You know, this is my view, and I certainly left it open that he might have that perception, but it certainly wasn't. I wasn't going to come back to my board and say, stop the press. You know,
It's safe to say his interpretation, his impression is different than your intentions.
Yeah, but that happens.
Absolutely, that happens. It does. Did you have any other meetings with direct meetings?
I might have met with them once, or once with the governor. That's where I got to know him.
And subject to him possibly coming to work, I
No.
take it didn't come up in any other conversations?
No, he certainly had a very sincere interest in will-hinckley, and that's something that stuck with me.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Nuzzing, I'm sure that when Senator Cates spoke to you about a desire to interrupt or to object, he was referring to anything I might have to say. I noticed you guys stick together pretty close. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Diamond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too will be brief, but I do need to clarify this clarification on something you said. You used, in response to Representative McClellan's question, you used the word threatening, which you felt was a threatening process. Did that threatening, did you feel that the school was threatened to the point it would be closed down if you got the disapproval in this instance from the government?
We felt if we didn't have the funding, that could very potentially trigger a series of events that would conceivably result in the school closing down. And that is why the board, as fiduciaries, took the steps that we did.
Thank you for that. By the way, thank you for being here. I just think it's very, very kind of you to take the invitation. And lastly, you had said that the school and the board are apolitical. My experience in this business, and I've been around a little bit, says when you start kicking state dollars, that's not apolitical. And when you hire a lobbyist, that's not apolitical. And when you hire prominent people, maybe some of the more prominent politicians in the state, not once but twice, that's not apolitical. So I say that as a basis to say that your perceptions are very, very important in this whole process. And what you think and what you feel about what happened here is an integral part of us finding the facts. And that's all we're here for, simply to find the facts. So I leave that with you if further questions come. And understand why you probe and so interested, because you've come forth and very prominent in the journey you have, but it's also a key player in this investigation.
Thank you, Senator. Any further questions? Representative Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moore. And I want to commend Goodwill-Hinckley and all its progress in the right directions. In sustainable living of troubled students, your marriage with KBCC, campus real estate location, is putting education in the right direction. So really appreciate what you're doing. I'm interested in the outward facing piece and the evolution of the job description as it came forward relative to the applicants. It makes a lot of sense. I worked with Glenn Cummings on some real estate issues on the campus, and he did a great job, really good job. But one of the intriguing comments that I was left with him talking with him was how amazed he was and how much of a believer he had become, basically opposing charter schools and private schools in the past, and how he was on board and was right there. So as you went down through the list of these potential applicants, thinking that each of these leaders in these parties or in these political positions generally have the best luck raising funds, and as you mentioned, a politician is good at speaking and raising money. As you looked at this particular applicant and his contacts and potential fundraising opportunities, basically in opposition of charter schools over the years, did you have any dialogue with that concern in hiring this individual at the board level?
We did, and I think ultimately it came out that really he's a supporter of Goodwill-Hinckley. I think Hinckley is a little bit different than many charter schools. That hands-on teaching and service to many at-risk youth. We did ask him several times his views were consistent with what Hinckley does. And he's really focused on that.
So you felt that his fundraising experience
and fundraising
was broad enough, so it didn't rely on what his catapulting experience was, so you could get beyond his normal contact?
For fundraising, we were viewing it not as fundraising from the state. I will say, going from $1 million deficit and to financial sustainability is one clear thing that we don't want to do, is to make ourselves subject to survival by the political process. So the school is working very hard to continue on that trajectory of financial sustainability. And we'll still get support absent this 2-year process of weaning ourselves off of this $530,000. But the goal is, certainly in financial sustainability, is to not present yourself at the risk of being too dependent on one source, be it state funding, federal funding, development even, and to have all expectations for all sources of revenue be consistent with sustainability. So our view on him being a good fundraiser was he's a personable fellow, he's comfortable with people and speaking. So particularly on my view, it was more on the development side, because our goal is to make sure that our sustainability entails the adequate amount of state funding, but nothing more.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Representative. Representative Sanderson.
Thank you. I have to apologize. I was jotting down a note, so I missed the first part of a comment. You referred to even those who may not be looking for a job. I missed the first part of that comment. Were you indicating that you were perhaps doing outreach to individuals for this position as well? Yes. So, pardon?
Yes.
In the second round.
In the second round.
And the second round was when? Was that before the March deadline for applying for the job? Was there a March deadline?
No, this is more recently, the last 2 or 3 months. 2 months.
Okay. But you weren't doing outreach prior to?
We probably should have, but no. We might have done minimal outreach, but we made it a point to say, particularly at the same time we were hiring a principal, we were enormously successful in finding who we feel is one of the best principals in the state, particularly for what he does. And what we found was not just resting with who has the resume built up, but asking around who's most qualified and who would fit what we need certainly served us well. So we're in the process of doing a search for an executive director. And for that position, we felt, let's take a step back and ask people like Lori LaChance, who we think the world does, and somebody that's been such a tremendous success for Thomas College. Who can we get to be somebody like that? And you might not have the resume, but might say this is an excellent opportunity to make a difference in a great institution in Maine.
Ms. LaChance obviously has an extensive resume regarding education and has done a fine job where she is. What prior to your taking the hot seat, if you will, the conversation and an interview with Mr. Brown, who is a staffer speaker, was shared with us. And it was said that it was Mr. Brown evidently told the OPEGA staff during, some questions that it was, I believe, the interim president who suggested that he perhaps reach out to Speaker Eves, the very last bit in March, and let him know that this job was available. Would that have been outreach?
I don't have any information on that. I
Okay.
can't answer that.
All right. All right. All right.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Representative Starkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, just one quick question. So absent the insertion of the executive branch into a hiring process that OPEGA has characterized as fair and thorough, would Mark Eves be the president of Goodwill Hinckley today? If that all hadn't happened, who would be president of Goodwill Hinckley right now?
Had we not been in jeopardy of losing the state funding, I would think that Mark Hughes would be the president.
Thank you very much. I think we've now exhausted our questions. Mr. Moore, thank you very much for being here. I'd like to remind everybody who was here voluntarily today. We really appreciate that. You learned a lot, and you're strong. We all wish you the best of luck going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will now continue with this public hearing. And again, Mr. Moore was the only one who's invited to here this morning. So we're now going to move out of the public hearing phase. As practice with legislative committees, we're going to give initial deference to legislators here. To do the rest, I believe, first up is Representative Kate. Please start remembering though. Here he comes. Again, the way we're going to proceed here, Dave, people come up and make whatever comment they would like. Just hang on for a moment after you finish. Members of the committee might have a question for you. Yeah. Again, remind folks, they have just recently come two things. There's an overflow room across the way in the Education Committee. And second, there's a sign-up sheet. This far corner of the room for those who would like to speak. Representative Kate, good morning. Welcome.
Chairman Kate, sit down, okay, with the committee?
It's all right if it sits down. We haven't voted on that.
More imposing. Thank you, Chairman Cates, Chairman Kruger, members of the GOC committee. As someone who served on this committee for a short period of time, I figured it was appropriate to keep with the tradition of bringing something for the committee. And based on the questions that I just witnessed, I figured it would be an appropriate time to give you that before I present. So I'm going to walk over and put this on the end. So I do have to say, often folks get up and speak on the House floor and say, I hadn't intended to speak, and I can actually say that's the truth when showing up today and even yesterday. But it's been interesting to listen today, and I think the discussions around the building rehab, and as I sat in the back of the room, I sort of thought of all the people in this room that have a connection to Goodwill Hinckley, and I was happy to hear Representative Campbell talk about the buildings and that historic footprint and the future of Goodwill Hinckley, Interact Valley Community College, as well as the changing lives. And I know that folks that will testify after me today will speak a lot on behalf of changing lives at Goodwill Hinckley. I know members that sit around this horseshoe have very interesting connections to Goodwill Hinckley as well. I imagine that Senator Davis, in his past life as a law enforcement officer, had dealings and saw the benefits of Goodwill Hinckley over the years. Representative McClellan as well, has great ties to Goodwill Hinckley. And so I'm here today not to testify myself, but to present a letter, and I'll read that out loud, and it's from the former Senator Howard Trotsky. So for folks who know Senator Trotsky, it's pretty rare that he misses an opportunity to actually come and testify. And I got to know Howard Trotsky when working on LRT reform and realized that we had lots in common. We are not of the same political affiliation, but we care about the Kennebec River Valley a great deal. Howard is a former registered Maine guide. He was a river legend on the Kennebec and frequently the guide of the year at Northern Outdoors. So for me, it's someone to live up and to be like. And Howard splits his time between Bangor as well as Caratunk. And if you're in the Kennebec River Valley, often you'll run into Howard and it will turn into a lengthy conversation of the history of the area. But that being said, he is off on a moose hunt and had anticipated being back by now, but is still in the woods on a moose hunt, where I'm not actually 100% sure, and I need to find out because I thought someone would ask. So if you'll indulge me, I will read this letter. Dear co-chairs Cates and Kruger, I write as a former Republican member of the Senate. There are few things as fundamental to our constitutional government as the three separate branches and distinct branches of government. The defined roles of each branch and the ability of each to check the powers of the others prevents one from amassing too much power and abusing it. This is why our government works. Just as seminal to our democracy is the vitality of free speech. I am deeply disturbed by Governor LePage's actions have compromised these principles. Many of the facts are not in dispute. Lines were crossed when the governor's disdain for political rival prompted his meddling. Impassioned political debate is one thing. In fact, it's expected, especially during these times of divided government. But using one's political power, in this case, the power of the chief executive, to intimidate and threaten a private organization is over its right to hire was vindictive politics at its worst. The governor's actions have ripple effects that extend well beyond will-hinckley and Speaker Eves. Without question, the tragic fact that the Speaker lost his job because of political differences from the governor. His firing is more collateral damage to a political battle. Speaker Eves was deprived of private employment opportunity and the ability to support his family. No one in this state deserves the treatment, including those who disagree with our governor. Intimidation and abuse of power hurts everyone. For lawmakers, it means speech may be stifled, votes may be based on political fear and retribution rather than the merits of policy. And the details of one's personal life, including one's family and job, may now become political casualties to the governor's vindictive style of politics. It's clear the governor's personal threats aren't confined to one person or even limited to one political party. Just days ago, the governor lashed out, attacking and threatening the committee's co-chair, Senator Cates. Make no mistake, the governor's accusations and threats are not limited to Senator Cates. He's threatening each of you on this committee and the legislature as a whole. Each of you have to do something about the governor's overreach and abuse of power. It appears that there is nothing that the governor will not do to avenge his personal grudges. I do not envy you as you shoulder this awesome responsibility before you today. But your actions will set the precedents for those who will follow. On my behalf, and the behalf of others who sit in those seats before you, I implore you to do what you can to protect the great institution of the legislature. You will set the precedent for those who will follow and respond to these attacks by the chief executive. Push back, stand up, and do what's right. Respectfully, Howard Trotsky.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Next on our legislative list, we have, I'm going to take someone out of order. She's actually not a legislator, but she's a former legislator and someone who, if you know Representative Rankin, it's the love of Representative Rankin, so we're going to take her next. Ellen Rankin?
Applause is probably inappropriate.
Senator Cates, Representative Coogan, and esteemed members of this committee, I'm so happy to be here and have an opportunity to speak today to this issue. I myself have a history with Goodwin. As a matter of fact, I was a student there at one time, and as the previous speaker said, that if you go to Goodwill, it changes lives, and it certainly did mine. After attending 16 different schools, by the time I go into through the 8th grade, I was then at Goodwill. So you can see where I've come from there, folks. I got a good start, and the school means a great deal to me. Recently, I attended a reunion of the alumni late this past summer. And we had a chance to have a speech from the trustees, or the speaker, the gentleman who spoke here today, spoke for the trustees, of course. And the alumni couldn't get any more satisfactory answers than some that you've gotten here today, unfortunately. And that school, as somebody said, that you've got to realize that the school is not just where we got a formal education, but it was our home. So many of them lived there for many, many years and have a great love for the school. I want you to know that in the interim, and as I became a representative, which has certainly been the greatest honor of my life, I too have received a handwritten note from the governor. So he is a man who, if it's not my way, it's the highway. And he speaks, this sounds very cool, but to me, I'm telling you the honest truth and my opinion. The governor is acting more like a dictator than a governor. If you don't do what he wants you to, you pay the price. And like Representative Master, whatever I've never been able to pronounce your name, I too have kept my note. There's no way I would throw that note away. So I'm hoping that after any of the questions that have been asked today, I think it's been very revealing, and I hope that we're going to find that some of the wise decisions are being made. I also understand, looking at, where did this appear to? Representative McClellan?
Just one just stepped out.
Well, he also, as I've been told, worked at Woodlawn. So he knows about the school as well. He's surprised to hear we have a connection on being on the education committee. I guess I should make this short and say that once again, the governor has overstepped his bounds, and just put it rather crudely, he's thumbing his nose at all of us. It is not right. It is not right, and I certainly hope that we can reach the right decision. And thank you very much for your time.
Representative, thanks so much for being here. All of us who serve with you, it's a pleasure to see you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Representative Evangelos. And by the way, gentlemen, who has a sign in the back of the room, please don't hold that up again. Go outside if you'd like, but not.
Pretty quiet.
Pardon me?
It's pretty quiet.
It is quiet, but it's very busy. Representative Evangelos.
Good morning, Senator Gates, Representative Kruger, and other members of the Government Oversight Committee. I am Representative Jeffrey Evangelos from Friendship, and I represent House District 91. From the accounts I've read in the press, I understand that Governor LePage's lawyer and senior policy advisor, Cynthia Montgomery and Lauren Chadbourne, have declined to testify before your committee today. This time they asserted the civil lawsuit pending between the Speaker of the House and the Governor as their grounds, despite the fact that neither of them are named parties to the lawsuit. However, on June 30th, 2015, Council Montgomery had already informed the committee in a letter to Director Ashcroft of the Governor's intentions to assert separation of powers between the executive and legislative branch. Citing Article 3 of the Constitution without any specifics, Council Montgomery contested the authority of OPEGA and the Government Oversight Committee to investigate Governor LePage, telling legislators to look to the Constitution for the authority to investigate. Subsequent to these developments, Governor LePage has attacked the committee's work and made comments on becoming of a chief executive regarding its members. Concerning the jurisdiction issue, it is important to note that the letter requesting an investigation submitted to the Government Oversight Committee on June 29, 2015, signed by Representatives Chipman, Warren, and Evangelos, included a clause citing the authority of legislators to investigate the governor under the Maine Constitution, Article 4, Part 1, Section 8, just as Ms. Montgomery has requested. Article 4, Part 1, Section 8 authorizes the Maine legislature to investigate the governor, and that is what we asked the Government Oversight to do on the June 29th, pertaining to the serious allegations discussed in the good will-hinckley brief. As it is clear that Governor LePage and his administration are stonewalling the committee and its investigation, I am requesting today that the Government Oversight Committee fully enhance its investigation with the full use of subpoena powers to depose witnesses under oath, including members of the executive branch. You are vested with the full power and authority to do so. Historic legal precedents in the United States have always found that members of the executive branch are required to testify, with courts ruling consistently that the public's right to know outweighs any other considerations. I have those citations if you need them. In addition, given the seriousness of the allegations against the governor and the damaging findings reported in the OPEGA brief, and the governor's own public admission on WMTW June 29th that he engaged in threats involving state assets, I am asking the committee to request the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Governor LePage for the following possible criminal violations: Title 17A, Section 355, extortion; Title 17A, Section 603, improper influence; and Title 17A, Section 903, misuse of entrusted property, state assets. Copies of each law are attached as exhibits to my testimony. Our system of government relies on checks and balances and co-equal branches of government. The abuse of power by any chief executive must be held accountable to the rule of law. Just this week, in another sign that the rule of law within the LePage administration is violated, we all learned that Governor LePage convened a commission in secret to investigate the Maine Human Rights Commission in clear contravention of the public right to know laws. In closing, I'd like to discuss the meaning of the word discretion. There is a clear difference between discretion and abuse of power. Discretion is defined from various dictionaries as follows: the quality of having or showing discernment, good judgment, discreet, cautious reserve in speech so that people will not be harmed, the trait of judging wisely and objectively. Discreet means to be wise or judicious in avoiding mistakes or faults, prudent, circumspect, cautious, and not rash. In other words, discretion is exercising judgment tempered with these attributes in order to arrive at a final decision or outcome. These are not the attributes of Governor Paul LePage. Abuse of power is defined as the act of using one's position of power in an abusive way, manipulating someone with the ability to punish them if they don't comply. Improper use of authority by someone who has that authority because he or she holds a public office. Abuse of discretion is defined as any action by a government official by which that official renders decisions for a clearly improper purpose. These are the attributes that describe Governor Paul LePage. Legislators can no longer remain silent. I will second Representative Franklin's motion on that. Many of us knew something was terribly amiss when on March 24, 2015, Governor Paul LePage fired Brigadier General James Campbell, Adjutant General of the Maine National Guard, just moments before Campbell was to deliver his annual State of the Guard speech to a joint session of the legislature on that Tuesday morning. The manner in which this firing was conducted, moments before Brigadier General Campbell was to address the joint session, with his wife, family, and friends assembled in the audience along with members of the military, revealed a vicious, vindictive, and ruthless approach to governance never before witnessed in our great state. It's time we exercised our power as legislators to hold Governor LePage accountable to the rule of law. I want to thank you for your consideration of my request. That concludes my statement. And I'll answer any questions if you have any. And I do have those two court cases where the public's right to know and the gathering of evidence superseded executive power.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Just like to put it again on behalf of the whole committee, caution people to please try to keep your remarks to the scope of what we're doing here in this particular investigation for a number of reasons, including the fact that a lot of people here to talk to them. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Representative Chipman. Good morning.
Thank you, Senator Cates. Good morning, Representative Kruger, members of the Government Oversight Committee. I am Representative Ben Chipman, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. The people of Maine deserve to have confidence in the integrity of our political system. The actions of Governor LePage raise serious questions about the misuse of public office and public funds. As you know, I'm one of 4 lawmakers, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, who requested the investigation that you voted to authorize into the governor's threats to withhold state funds from will-hinckley, an organization that helps at-risk youth. OPEGA, and through this 25-page report, confirmed the allegations The governor threatened Goodwill Hinckley because it hired Speaker Mark Eads as its president. A state payment which was already in process was withheld and only restored after the organization fired Speaker Eads to avert financial crisis. If the governor is able to abuse his power to take revenge on a political rival, I would ask this question: can any elected official or any independent organization or any everyday Mainer be safe? Every elected official in Maine must be free to vote his or her conscience. Every independent organization should be free to make decisions in its own best interest. And all Maine citizens should be free from the fear that their livelihoods depend on the whims of the governor or any elected official. While the 25-page report is very thorough, some matters need further attention. For one, there's the key meeting that top LePage staffers and the Department of Education officials held. It led the Department of Education's extraordinary actions of pulling back more than $500,000 that was already in process for Goodwill Hinckley. There are differing accounts for what happened at this highly unusual meeting, which is part of the reason why this committee asked some individuals to appear at the public hearing here today. Two top LePage staff members refused to appear to answer questions. Aaron Chadbourne and Thomas Jarvin. I have two requests for you today. One request is to issue subpoenas to these two staff members so we can get to the bottom of what happened. These staff members, as Representative Evangelos mentioned, are not parties in the lawsuit filed by the Speaker of the House, so there's no reason that they should not appear before this committee to answer questions. I hope you will issue these subpoenas right away. As you know, OPEGA's task force is a fact-finding one. OPEGA does not determine which laws have been broken or not, and whether, so it should not be a surprise to anyone that the report issued on September 8th does not say either way whether laws were broken. OPEGA simply gathers information and presents facts. The OPEGA report is the beginning of a process that should not be considered finished. What we need to do now is determine, based on the information in the report, what specific laws, if any, were broken by the governor. My second request today is that you refer this 25-page report and all other information associated with this investigation to a prosecutor or the Attorney General's office to make this important determination. I'm not an attorney, but I know, as Representative Evangelos mentioned, in Title 17A, Section 903, it talks about misuse of public assets. And if this situation does not qualify for misuse of public assets, I don't know what does. We need to get to the bottom of what happened, if any laws were broken, and hold the governor and any of the staff members accountable. The people of Maine deserve and should expect nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions for the representative? Seeing none, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Representative Cooper. Good morning.
Chairman Cates and Representative Kruger and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. I had prepared written testimony, which I submitted to the clerk at your first meeting, I believe it was in July, so it may already be in your folders. Today I'd like to present a shortened and somewhat amended version of those remarks. I am Janice Cooper. I represent House District 47, which consists of Yarmouth, the first witness, and Shibby Island and Long Island. On July 24th, I wrote to the director of OPEGA, Beth Ashcroft, requesting that the committee broaden its investigation to include other episodes that may suggest similar improper uses of governmental power by the chief executive. My request urged the committee to also instruct OPEGA to investigate the alleged threat by Governor Paul LePage to withhold public monies already committed to the World Acadia Congress unless that entity terminated its president, Jason Parent. According to newspaper accounts, the governor was displeased with Mr. Parent because of his association with the governor's campaign opponent, Mike Michaud. The coup de grace, according to the Portland Press Herald, was the fact that Mr. Parent presented Mr. Michaud with some commemorative token before he had given one to the governor. Mr. Parent has resigned, and I believe the state funding was subsequently provided. The newspaper accounts indicate that its sources are secondhand, and that the parties directly privy to the alleged threat either denied the connection or were unwilling to confirm that Mr. Parent's resignation was a result of the governor's quoted threat. There can be, of course, a world of difference between what a party will tell a newspaper and what evidence they may tell a legislative committee with the authority to compel testimony under oath through a subpoena. What is clear in any event is that, if true, the reported allegations are disturbingly similar to the one at issue in the Goodwill-Hinckley matter. When this committee completes its work, its findings can be used in many different ways at its sole discretion. One possibility, although certainly not foreordained, is that it will be used by other members of the legislature or this committee as the basis for the Maine House of Representatives to determine whether the government has committed an impeachable offense. While this step is not at all certain to be taken, and I take no position on this, the committee, in determining the scope of its present investigation, should bear in mind the relevant history and precedent regarding impeachment, an unprecedented step in Maine history. Scroll down here. What constitutes an impeachable offense is both a factual and a legal determination. As counsel to the U.S. House Judiciary Committee in the late 1980s, I was part of a legal team that represented the House of Representatives in impeachment proceedings concerning a federal judge accused of conspiracy to commit bribery and other misdeeds. The factual investigation, the legal analysis, the proceedings before the Judiciary Subcommittee and full committee, and the presentation to the House and subsequent trial in the U.S. Senate consumed over 3 years. Accordingly, I became well acquainted with the concept of, quote, impeachable offenses, as well as the process and procedures most commonly used and accepted in impeachment cases, both at the federal and state level. Impeachable offense is a concept that goes back to English common law as its understanding of the relevant terms in the 18th century, the time of the writing of the Constitution. So, for example, the federal standard of, quote, high crimes and misdemeanors does not mean misdemeanors in the modern sense of the word. Rather, the founders intended to reach only offenses that go to the heart of the officer's misuse of official powers. Purely private malfeasance was not the point of impeachment. I think it is fair to say that the absence of this element of official duty was the key reason for the acquittal of President Bill Clinton in his impeachment trial. Secondly, the gravity of the offense, whether it is serious enough to warrant impeachment, relates to its impact.
I apologize for interrupting you. If this is in your written testimony, I'm just looking out of the sea of folks who come from afar. If you could summarize for us, and I mean that with no disrespect, but with an awful lot of other folks.
Okay, I'll be happy to do that. In assessing whether or not to expand this investigation with the thought in the back of your mind about how it might be used, it is important to recognize how it impacts. And we've heard a lot about chilling effect. Well, chilling effect, a concept in a well-established concept in the law, means that not only do you have to look at how it affects the party that is being penalized by the act, but how it impedes the freedom of everybody else who might find themselves in a similar situation. So if an action has a chilling effect on the general public, on legislators, that is something that must be considered because increases the impact of that malfeasance. Secondly, if there's a pattern of similar acts of malfeasance, that too increases its gravity. Thirdly, this committee is free to look at other offenses that may rise to this level of impeachable offenses, even if they're totally unconnected with the matter at hand. For example, the federal government completed a report, I think it was about a year ago, on the governor's alleged pressuring of administrative law judges and how that affected the separation of powers. While no further action was taken by this body, that does not mean you could not revisit that in the context of your inquiry. There are other acts that have occurred in the recent weeks that also, I think, rise to the level of concern, such as the governor's unwillingness to govern, basically by refusing to appoint people to vacancies on important boards, and to instruct his own appointees not to appear at those meetings, thus making the lack of a quorum and the inability of those agencies to function. So these and other acts, I think, show a pattern of misuse of official powers that this committee should consider in determining its scope of investigation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.